All right, wonderful. We'll go ahead and get things underway. Welcome to our conversation today with Global Impact and Garwood Events around event fundraising in a changing environment. I'm Sam Ducey with Global Impact, and we're thrilled to have you all join us today. We'll start off with a few housekeeping items. As you will see, we're on a Zoom call. This is meant to encourage engagement and conversation. We really hope that after our panel discussion at the top of this call, we'll get to hear from you, get to hear what your experiences have been with events this past year and what questions you have for the year ahead. So we encourage you, certainly, we welcome you to turn your video on and certainly when we begin the discussion to unmute yourself and chime in. So we'll start off just with a bit of background. We're all well aware that the past year has presented us with unprecedented, to use the buzzword of the moment, unprecedented times. We've changed so much of what we do and how we do it, not most of all how we convene and connect with one another. And so as we continue to grapple with how to move forward in this next year, and hopefully with the return of in-person events, certainly virtual engagement still a possibility and still something that we're looking to, having that conversation and sharing what best practices that we've found in our work, and also being able to share any advice and guidance that might be helpful to you moving forward. So we'll start things off by introducing the panelists today. We're joined by members of the team at Global Impact and then also Garwood Events. So Nicole Garwood and Cynthia Ramirez McConnell from Garwood Events, and Matt Gembecki joining me from the Global Impact team. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Nicole, to say a few words of introduction.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you virtually, as we have all been meeting one another virtually in the last year. As Sam mentioned, my name is Nicole Garwood. I am the founder and owner at Garwood Events. We are a boutique event firm that's been in business for a little over 16 years now, and we focus largely on nonprofit and corporate events. Both Cynthia, who you'll meet in a moment, and myself come from working in-house both at corporate and not-for-profit organizations, which is really where we've gathered all of our expertise in terms of, working as part of a team. And so at Garwood, what we do is we like to look at ourselves as an extension of everybody's team. As I mentioned, we're small. It allows us to sort of get in there and really just sort of work with you on the day-to-day on everything from sort of planning and counsel and scope to actual execution on events. And we're a word of mouth firm. That's pretty important to both of us. It sort of is atypical of what you'll find right now in the industry, because we prefer that you get to us by hearing from somebody else or having attended an event that we've participated in. And, we think that speaks mountains usually. When you get a referral from a colleague or a trusted associate of yours. So that's a little bit about us and our scope and our frame. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cynthia, to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Ramirez McConnell. I am the Director of Event Management with Garwood Events. I've been producing events now for about 15 years and joined the Garwood team about 6 years ago, where I've been working with both corporate and nonprofit clients on their global events. About a year ago now, I led our team transition into the virtual space, and we created a video production arm of our business, which has definitely been key during this time. I'm happy to be here with all of you today and look forward to jumping back in after the panel discussion to help answer any questions you might have. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Cynthia. Matt Gembecki, Managing Director with Global Impact. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Global Impact, we are a global nonprofit intermediary. And so what that means is that we raise funds for nonprofit organizations doing work here in the US and around the world. We support organizations through a number of different fundraising channels, through workplace, through back-end financial support, as well as with fundraising strategic planning in areas of major gifts, digital event planning, so on and so forth. And it's really through that lens that we've partnered, and I see a number of our partners who have joined us on the call here, with organizations both pre-COVID and during the COVID time, to help come up with a comprehensive fundraising strategy that is inclusive of one-on-one donor touch points, mass outreach to digital donors, and then the curation of events that will lead to achieving fundraising goals. And we're really excited for our partnership with Garwood Events, because they really are the experts in that event planning piece and making sure that that event is successful, both in terms of the day of, but also how it fits into the broader strategy. And looking forward to the discussion with Nicole and Cynthia and the questions that you all will have for us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Cynthia and Nicole. So we'll go ahead and get started with our conversation. We certainly would encourage you as we go through these questions to start thinking about some of your own questions that you may have for Matt, Nicole, and Cynthia. What events that you hosted this past year, what worked, what didn't, what major questions are maybe still outstanding as you develop your 2021 event strategy, and really looking to dig in and follow that. But to start, we'll go ahead and dive in with Matt and Nicole. And the first question I'll pose to you first, Matt, but would love to hear your thoughts as well, Nicole, around your experience and how the nonprofit community has adapted to not being able to hold in-person events this past year.
Thank you, Sam. You know, I have to say I was really impressed and blown away by the nonprofit community, both from the organizations, the people working in development, as well as by the donor community. And what I mean by that is, you know, it was a tough year for everyone. that goes without saying, you know, at this point, not just for events, but really for all of our fundraising strategy, and even beyond that, for just, you know, basic human needs. And I think coming from that point, you know, literally a year ago in March, where there was so much uncertainty, to see where the year ended up. And I think now, kind of 3 months into 2021, we have a full picture of how the 2020 year ended. And anecdotally, the fundraising results were there. And what I saw throughout the year in terms of events was creativity and innovation in terms of transitioning events that were formerly in person, events that were kind of the marquee or touchstone point of a fundraising strategy, and really finding creative ways to still engage with those donors. And when I say I was impressed by the donor community, it really is just that. When, you know, many of the clients that we've worked with have reported that they were able to maintain their levels of fundraising and hit their fundraising goals. And I think, you know, what COVID provided was this kind of sense of solidarity, where donors seem to react to the fact that, okay, we can't get together, but we know that these organizations are doing great work and worthy of support. And the fundraising results were there. And, you know, really looking forward to seeing and hearing from Nicole about 2021 and what, you know, what it's going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll second that, Matt. I think that, you know, everyone on this call here knows the nonprofit community is really resilient. Right? I mean, the closest thing in our history that we've seen come close to that is really in 2008 with the market crash. And nonprofits were the only ones still doing events because they still really needed the fundraising efforts, and the community rallied around that in the same way. And I think that the pandemic, you know, certainly was a very different scope for everybody, and it took a good couple of weeks to sort of put your mind around it. And obviously for some groups, it took longer than others to sort of figure out what that transition was going to look like. But really, the need is still there. And I think that, you know, I agree with you, Matt, that both donors and organizations realized and recognized the need to continue on in some format. And really the determination became around, okay, what does that format look like, right? You know, I mean, from our end, I would say 90% of our clients all transitioned to doing something. What that is entirely different for each person, and it's not necessarily always just event driven, right? I mean, it can be major gifts, it can be video outreach, it can be other sorts of things that all revolve around fundraising. But everybody rose to the occasion, for sure.
That's great to hear, and would be curious to know from both of you, whether there are particular events this past year that you saw through 2020 or even in early 2021 that were particularly innovative or were taking hold of the opportunity and looking at how to leverage this new way of going about with engaging an audience. Matt, do you want to start off?
Excuse me. Yeah, I'd be happy to start. Two really come to mind that stick out for me, although there were many throughout the whole year. The first, and I know a couple of our colleagues from Action Against Hunger are on the line, and during the Q&A portion, would love for you to chime in and tell us a little bit more about what you were able to do, and provide some additional context. But Action Against Hunger, which is an amazing organization at the forefront of eradicating world hunger, particularly in Africa, conducts a large gala every year in the fall timeframe, and it's a great opportunity to engage their board members, to engage networks and friends and colleagues of their board, and a large portion of fundraising revenue comes in during that time. And it was early in the pandemic, about this time of year, as Nicole said, it took about 2 weeks or so, I think, for all of society, all of humanity to kind of adjust, but then started thinking about these types of questions, and already what was impressive about what Action Against Hunger was able to do was from the outset, get their board engaged around the idea of not doing an event, but still engaging with those networks. So as opposed to going a full year without touching folks who maybe weren't as close to the organization, but would come to an event and support the organization that way. And really develop messaging, linking what was happening in COVID, what was happening in people's lives here in the US and in New York, where the majority or many of the donors who would have attended the event lived, linking it to what was happening to the communities on the ground, having really tight messaging, and then meeting with board members, and then having board members pull together small groups of their donors. And ultimately that effort raised over 7.5 million, and was just really impressed with how that came together, and honored that Global Impact got to be a part of it. I would say that the other really innovative thing that I saw, and a couple of different organizations did this, is still going forward with salon events. One of the things that we typically recommend as part of a major gift strategy is to pull together a group of people, a group of major donors, board members, board networks, strategic prospects that we're looking to get closer to, and pull them in a room, invite them to a dinner, have a moderator, have a topic. And we've seen a lot of success with that model. And a number of organizations went ahead with them over Zoom. And I think at first we were all, a little bit, I don't want to say skeptical, but, interested to see how it would play out. And one organization that I worked with, and these donors were in disparate locations, they were all going to come to, this was going to be a side event at a conference in one location. They were all at disparate locations around the country, and actually had their events team, find the local restaurant near to these particular individuals who were attending, find the restaurant that was doing cocktail delivery and, bottle of wine delivery. So that way everybody was sitting on a Zoom screen over dinner, but with a high quality meal that you would have gotten at a salon event, still had the moderator on, and the discussions ended up being really robust, and it allowed those relationships to move forward as they would have if the event had been in person. And I think everybody agrees that, we don't want to do that again. We want to get back in that room, but knowing that it can be done over Zoom was really powerful, and kind of proof of concept to the power of relationships in the work that we do.
Yeah, I agree with that. We love all of our children, as you do, so we don't have any one particular one that we would call out as specific. I think what's really amazing about what happened is that everybody got it opened up a new channel. No matter who you are, no matter what organization, no matter how you are represented, this year, whether you knew you wanted it or not, opened up a new form of let's get creative and figure out how to connect. And I think that was really wonderful. One of the things that I'll tell you that's come out of it that I think is interesting is that outdoor events are really going to be key. They always were nice, but they're going to play a much bigger role. So for those folks that did, golf tournaments, that's a big portion of it. Golf tournament is the socially distanced sport we never knew we needed. They're just sort of built in. social distancing measures there for that. But one of the things that we found that's kind of really gotten creative is those golf courses can be used for other things, right? So we've seen tastings come out of that, where people set up wine tastings or food tastings from around the world to experience, you know, if you're a global organization or if you're an organization focused someplace else, let's put 18 different holes of, you know, a chef at each hole with different cuisines going on. And you have one person and, you know, they're timed by groups when they can come through, when they can't. The carts are already there. And, you know, you have this opportunity to really sort of engage people in sort of more like a small section than you would in a larger event. But that's sort of what your higher donors want anyhow. And what you want to be able to do is hit more people. We've done scavenger hunts, or where you can, you know, learn bits and pieces about each organization as you go along, whether you're actually playing golf or you have a whole different sector in place. Obviously that counts on the weather a little bit, but I do think that that was one of the most innovative things, because they are large courses with a lot of space available to them. So that was that's sort of one interesting thing that I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of, is outdoor events. But I think any way that you can sort of find to re-engage, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more with your donors on a different level, really everybody got creative.
Great, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
That 18-hole tasting, that sounds great.
Yeah, I know. Dangerous, but good, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so you mentioned, Nicole, outdoor events and that being something that certainly people have found a new way to use a space that maybe they were using before in a different way. What else do you see sort of when you look to what events will look like moving forward, either things that are going to be carried over from what we learned this past year or something totally new?
Well, it's a little bit of the crystal ball effect, right? You know, I mean, everybody's looking for one thing, but I would say, sort of touching on what Matt said earlier, you know, last year was really about out of necessity, right? Okay, we have a 300 person or 500 person event in, you know, Boston or New York or wherever we are, and now we can't do it. What do we do and how do we get there? And I think, you know, organizations did a good job of trying to figure out what they could do. And obviously donors, you know, found a great way of still supporting and maintaining. So if last year was out of necessity, this year is out of fun, right? And I think that's what we're starting to see, is like, okay, this medium is here to stay. Let's have some fun with it. And how can we do that? So that's, I think, what we're really looking at this year, is like bringing in elements of fun. So playing on what Matt was saying about those salons with the dinners, there's a lot more, you know, the reason that this call is a web, it's not a webinar, it's a Zoom call, is for the same thing. We want people to feel like they have an opportunity to actually engage. And I think that that's what we're seeing a lot with our clients, and what we're advising on is finding ways to engage, whether you're doing, you know, sometimes that might mean you're doing 3 or 4 of them with a group instead. So you're doing high donors and you're doing them at different levels, and you're doing a Zoom night instead of a webinar night, so that everybody's on, they can see one another, they can talk, you can physically, you know, toast to one another. We've sent, you know, obviously bottles of wine or champagne or things like that to people's homes. We've done custom labels or different things. We've had, and I use this term because everybody on this call here has a celebrity, right? Like celebrity is a different thing for each person and what it is. It can be a scientist, it can be an educator, it can be a musician, it can be, you know, anyone under the sun, a specialist in a certain field. It can obviously be, you know, an entertainer or somebody like that as well. But everybody has somebody that's a rock star in their own in their own field. And so utilizing an opportunity for your donors to get to really sit down with people in an evening and have the same experience, if not almost a slightly better one than they would have in that 300 person dinner. Their donation might mean that their table's a little closer, or they get a, you know, a meet and greet opportunity or whatever. But here they're getting to sit and sort of do, you know, we're doing a lot of firesides, you know, between a member of the organization and whoever that other person is, whether it's an honoree or a specialist or somebody like that. They're getting to have these conversations together, and you're getting to be a part of it and ask your question and, you know, they're really carefully crafted when we do these things. You know, they come with a full run of show of their own. It's not just like a free-for-all conversation. We want to make sure that each donor gets hit by somebody within the organization and asked a question and like, oh, okay, so you're out in LA right now, tell me about X, right? You know, are your kids back in school? Is this happening? So that they get a little bit more of a one-on-one you know, form of communication with you, and they get that high touch point. Branding, really big, because, you know, not dissimilar from how it would be if we were all gathered in person somewhere. Your virtual event has to look like it would if you were sitting at a table, you know, someplace really lovely, which I know we all wish we could be. But I think that, you know, if you can, it helps you with your sponsors, it helps you with high donors, it helps to carry through. And it really helps people to sort of focus and say, okay, this is a thing that I'm attending. It's an actual something. So branding, we are using a lot of different platforms for live streaming, you know, depending on whether you're a big event and you're more of a conference and you want people to be communicating and networking, or whether you want it to be a smaller, intimate thing, you know, making sure that your logo's there, making sure that your sponsors are well recognized and called out. You know, a lot of live streaming platforms have push notifications, which are helpful for things throughout the night as well, with auctions and all of that sort of thing as well. Crafting your giving levels, that's going to be really key this year, because obviously your deliverables are changing tremendously. So what we usually do with most of our clients is sit down and sort of have a realistic conversation about what their typical goal is, what their goal can be here. And to be honest with you, and Matt, you touched on this too, we saw the same thing. Most of our clients did as well, if not better. And, you know, I know we'll get to this later on, but I think that there's some component of the virtual that's probably here to stay for a while, if for nothing else, because it allows you to connect with so many of your donors across the board who wouldn't otherwise, either by location, be able to come and attend and join, or financially wouldn't be able to come and afford that higher ticket or table price, but still really wants to be able to participate and might do it at a different level that's virtual. And so I think those sorts of things, having the platforms that's there that are available to help with that, I think is going to be something that we're really going to see as well.
I agree, Nicole. I think it was a really humanizing, you know, experience, and that donors really responded when organizations went that extra mile to meet them where they were. And I think that's a principle of fundraising that well predates COVID. But really, you know, I think the pandemic stress tests that, and it held true, and the results were there.
Yep, agreed.
And you touched on this element of what part of virtual programming might stay in place even beyond when there's a demand for it because of the circumstance we're in. As you mentioned, there's a lot about greater access and opportunity to engage with people. Where do you see that going? I know it's, again, the crystal ball looking to the future, but, you know, what value do you see in virtual programming, even when in person is completely available as an option again?
I mean, it really depends on the event that you're talking about. And I think from our perspective at Garwood, we're really taking it on a case-by-case basis. Because the rollout is going to be a little bit tricky in the first year. As I said, all of our clients have determined to maintain virtual programming for this year, for the fall. I think corporates have it a little bit easier when it comes to potential. I think we will start to see some things happening in the fall, but you know, as everyone on this call here knows, if you're doing something in October, you're making your asks right now of your high donors, right? You need a longer lead time than this pandemic allows us to have. And so most of those groups have decided for this year to go virtual. But I think that when it does come down next year, I think we're going to be looking at doing some live streaming, doing some opportunities like that for our in-person awards dinners or that sort of a thing. You just have to be careful about where it is, because you don't want to cannibalize on yourself and have somebody say like, oh, I don't need this $10,000, $50,000 table. We can just, you know, we can do this from home. So I think the way in which it comes into fruition for those type of galas and things has to be really carefully crafted and curated. But I do think it's here. I think for sure with things like conferences, whether they're one-day or multi-day seminars, we've seen great results for both for our nonprofit partners and our corporate partners. With something that maybe usually has 200 people or 500 people in attendance would have upwards of 700 to 1,000 people, because more people could come and make it readily available. And that, of course, is the benefit for you, because then your message is getting out further. So I think it's unrealistic to plan as though it's not here in some capacity. And I think it's to your benefit to assume that it's going to be there in some capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, have you found sort of what have you found in conversations that, as Nicole said, you're making the ask now, if there's an event in the fall, what have you found in conversations with nonprofits recently?
Yeah, I think that this is, somewhat of a period of uncertainty. I think, maybe not by this time last year, but certainly a month from now last year, it was pretty clear that events in the fall were going to have to be canceled, and people were making those plans. And I think we're, on the opposite end of that cycle now, where with the vaccination news, rolling out, I think there is a desire to get back to some of that in person, and figuring out what that right mix is I think why a lot of folks are on the line here, is figuring that out. My gut is that it will be hybrid. And I completely agree, Nicole, with what you were saying, that the fact that we can do it, we can make it fun, and that people are still going to want to engage that way, means that it's going to have to be a part of programming moving forward. But there are a few things that can't be replaced about the in-person event either. And so in some ways the job gets a little bit harder, right? Because you're going to have to meet both audiences. And it really resonated with me, what you said, Nicole, about some of those table levels and figuring out what that's going to be and what you're offering. Because, ultimately, oh, sorry, Nicole. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that's where we're getting into looking at, like for this year, okay, and I think we're training ourselves and we're training everybody else to sort of say, it's not like, okay, we're going to be virtual again this year. It's like, okay, we're going to be virtual again this year. Oh, let's see, what can we do with that? And really looking at looking at it as an opportunity, right? It is an opportunity, let's face it, to really connect in particular with your high donors. This year is really about crafting these experiences for your high donors. And so what do we have that we can offer them? And then what else can we provide? Right. So, some is the information and the conversation and, the salon type format or the fireside, whatever it is you're going to be doing. We've done movie, like soft launch movie premieres with 20 people, just like getting behind the scenes, or a documentary with the producer and so forth. Like just looking at what's creative and what can you offer to the people who are making these high gifts that isn't. But, the other thing that I'll say is, pretty much anything is appreciated by the high donors. I don't know if that's been your experience too when you did some of these things like with the dinners or whatnot, but people are so thrilled when you send something to their home. They're thrilled by it. It just means like, hey, you know what, I've thought about you, and I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you supporting us. I appreciate this. They're all in. The number of times we get, photos from people or what, like, I'm ready, I'm sitting down, I'm a donor, and oh my gosh, look what just arrived for me. Thank you so much. That's really like, that's your opportunity as a nonprofit, is like, that's a great connection point right there for me. So there are some real positives to virtual that, let's face it, on a night of a big event, you don't have capacity to hit on all those people in the same way. So I think there are going to be some positives that come out of it.
Yeah, I completely agree, Nicole. And, at the end of the day, we're not selling the table, you're selling the good work of the organization. And so, this gives us an opportunity to change the conversation a little bit, but the underpinning of it all is the mission, the good work that's being done on the ground, and finding creative ways to highlight that will be key. But given what I saw in 2020, I have full confidence that, the sector will continue to evolve and innovate to meet those demands.
Agreed.
So I'm going to ask one final question of you, and then certainly encourage others on the line to ask the questions that you have as well for Matt, Nicole, and Cynthia about events. The last question that I'll pose to you, Nicole and Matt, is really, so we talked about sort of how this will shape the future of nonprofit events, what comes next. And so the question, I guess, is twofold. So first, if you're only doing one event this year, what is that going to look like? What would your recommendation be, sort of in a broad sense? We talked about things being creative, making sure they're fun and engaging. And then what do you see sort of down the line as what the impact of this past year and even this next year will have on how event fundraising really takes shape?
Okay, so I'll jump in on that first. I'll say this, not everybody always loves to hear this, but don't ever think that you're doing one event in a year. No matter what you do, you're having multiple touch points throughout the year. And that's something that virtual actually made happen a lot easier than in previous years. But even if your one big thing is, I don't know, November 8th is your day and your one big event that you had planned and now you maybe are thinking of switching it back to virtual, I would still encourage you that you are doing something in May that's a special something that's built into some of those packages for the high donors, and that you're, working with a video production team and you're getting some videos, like, let's say your organization focuses on students, or it focuses on, let's follow 1 or 2 students for the next 6 months, right? Like, have them check in with the videographer every once in a while. And then let's tell that story as it goes. And you're sending out a monthly mission on, how Nicole is doing, managing all of this in the pandemic or whatnot. You're going to have to be doing multiple touch points for one event. And so I would encourage everybody to look at it as a multi-axis point type of a situation, and something that that's how you really want to follow in with this. As for where we're going, again, if I could pull out that ball, I don't know. I think that we're a resilient group. I think that in-person events will return 100%. I think that they'll return back in full force, but I do think I think we're going to see some moderation on it. I think that some of those 1,000-person events might not be as likely in the next 2 years or so, and I think that we're going to be seeing smaller, more creative programming.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I totally agree. And Sam, I was going to try to cheat on your answer, and if you said if there could be one event, and I was going to say, well, I would do one type of event, which would be kind of that curated virtual salon, but I would do it multiple times. And I think, Nicole, you shared a similar sentiment that that connection with key segments of of your donor base and having really personal touches and conversations, and completely agree on the large events. I attended a virtual conference back in September. It was really high level people speaking, but obviously we were all virtual. And I believe it was a former Secretary of State and a current Congressperson, talking about the issue. And this was kind of during the election, talking about democracy and the upcoming election. And I was, walking the dog around the neighborhood with earbuds in, listening to this stimulating conversation. And there was a part of me that was thinking, this is really cool, to be able to do this. And then there was a more personal Q&A later in the day that I was able to join and share my thoughts on what I had heard. And just thinking like, gosh, I don't want that to totally go away. And so I agree that the larger in-person event might be, the hybrid format is probably here to stay.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Matt, and thank you, Nicole. And Matt, you touched on the more personal Q&A, and that's what we hope to have now. So we encourage you to ask your questions. And certainly if you have a specific question for either Matt or Nicole or Cynthia, please feel free to direct it to them. At the bottom of your screen under reactions, you have the option to raise your hand. So if you want to raise your hand with any questions, and feel free to take yourself off mute, share your video if you feel comfortable. And would love to hear from you all. Certainly as well, Cynthia, if there's anything to add, great. Bob.
Yeah, thank you. So as somebody who really knows nothing about events, I'm wondering if there's any really helpful industry literature that shows maybe what a given type of event works well for a given desired result, or if there's just something that shows and proves that events work well. I wish my question could be more specific and articulate, but I guess I'm looking for something that maybe if you had to convince other people to hold events, something that you could set on their desk and say, here.
Are you talking about for virtual events?
I'm thinking either. We're really just in early planning stages and then trying to gather as much information as we can. So anything that's actually specific as opposed to maybe just opinion or, small sample size anecdotal, anything that's more broad-based and compelling.
I don't actually know of any literature specifically to direct you towards in saying that, Bob, that's part of why we were saying for us that we always go with the word of mouth approach for our firm. It's basically based on the fact that, if somebody gets to us, it's because they've had successful results. Each group is so different that it's a little hard to say, like, here's the formula, here's what works best. It really would depend on what you're looking to do and the format for it. I don't actually know of any specific industry materials on virtual events in the past year and how they've worked.
Okay, I appreciate that, and forgive me, this isn't accusatory or anything like that, but it seems like in many ways events are things that people in development do because that's what people in development do, not because they're proven to be really, increasingly effective or anything along that line. It's,
right. I mean, that's a fair point. It's a valid point. I think that's one that we've faced a lot this year when suddenly events disappeared, right? And I think what events are in the nutshell is a touch point for you. It's an opportunity for messaging, and it's an opportunity to touch base with your donors. And to really, hopefully do outreach to new donors. And usually that comes in the form of, when somebody buys a table and they've invited 8 friends that don't know your organization quite as well. So I think that I personally do think that they work. I mean, we've seen great results for our organizations that we work with over the years with it, but it is certainly only one method of fundraising.
Yeah, Nicole and Bob, I can, add to that, and I certainly agree, Nicole, with what you said, that it's one method of fundraising. I wouldn't say it's done because that's what people in development do, but it's more done to meet that desire for connection among donors or potential donors. And so that's why I think a lot of the underpinning of the conversation today was about forming connections with specific subsets of donors that you're looking to deepen with the organization, because there's something that, a mail appeal or a digital appeal or even a phone call doesn't meet that kind of getting people in a room, or in the case of 2020 in a Zoom room, really does meet that kind of human desire to connect more deeply.
Thank you both. That's helpful.
We have a question in the chat from Teresa. If an event serves to raise unrestricted support, how do we do virtual again so that we are raising much needed dollars when virtual doesn't bring people together?
So you're sorry, Teresa, I'm just trying to understand your question a little bit more. You're asking how you raise the unrestricted funds in virtual if virtual doesn't bring your group together?
Yeah, I'll just, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I raise funding specifically from corporations, and I'm very cynical about the virtual, so I'll just say that I think it worked last year because it was new. It was something different. It was the only way people could connect, and people were creative and great and so forth. I think people are itching to get together again, and I'm not sure how you top last year and keeping the momentum with the virtual. With that said, is that how do I give benefits to a corporation when it's your board making the ask, people don't have to show up, they can pass off, someone else to attend virtually. There's no forcing them to participate, plus they don't get anything in return like they would for an in-person event.
So this is where, I mean, there's a couple of things I guess I would ask. One is, are the corporates making gifts that are just annual gifts, or are they making gifts that are around a specific event that you normally host?
It's a sponsor event.
Okay, so then, you know, one is talking about those branded platforms, so that they are getting their sponsorship listed appropriately, or the color is of the event is the color of, you know, the organization, whatnot, that's the corporation that's sponsoring you. And the other is, this is no different than our high donor conversation. Let's find out, I mean, they're sponsoring you because they believe in your organization and or they're friends with the board member. Find out what they want, and that's what you create, basically. They don't have to show up for the main event if you've already done a sponsor-driven program beforehand where they get something. You want to be in front of them. You want to have the opportunity to be in front of them in some way that's fun. I mean, we've done things that are completely not related to what your event is or what your organization is, such as, particularly with a lot of corporates, cooking demonstration evenings, sending them all the stuff and having a fabulous, you know, hiring a well-known chef or a well-known this wine tasting, same thing, send it out, you know, 3 bottles of whatever, and they'll do it. Or a mixologist, you know, you get the mixologist from some location, and they do something that night, and there's a Q&A, and those sponsors only can participate in that. It's not the master thing. It's not the typical thing where they're going to be like, I don't want to sit on this webinar or whatever it might be that you're doing, but it's something that's curated to them. It's about getting creative.
So just a follow-up question. Do you think it's stupid to at least plan for a fall in-person event and then switch it if for some reason, you know, we can't do it in person because, you know, the city won't allow you or so forth and so on?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our groups, you know, honestly, within the last week, probably is when the last few groups that were thinking they were going to be in person from a nonprofit perspective, that is when to determining that they weren't comfortable with it for this year. And it's really just waiting to see for each group how the rollout happens. But I think every event, you know, we have a program in that is scheduled for Vancouver that just, you know, got the plug pulled because we're seeing where this is going for Vancouver. It's a program that we can transition and do entirely virtually instead. So I think you have to have that in the back of your mind as you're making the plans for your event this year. I would definitely counsel you to have something that's going to fit either way. And to that, I would say, you know, maybe you're still doing this high donor thing virtually in the spring for your sponsors. You're doing something in June for your event in, you know, September or October with them. So either way, whether it happens or not, they still have that experience and you still have that connectivity point with them.
And I'll just jump in here. The other thing we've been talking a lot about is messaging, right? So if you are thinking about doing something in the fall and you want to push something out now, make sure you're including the messaging that says, we hope we will be able to gather in the fall. And we've definitely been talking to clients about that as well, just making sure that there may be a possibility that this may not happen. But at least you're setting the precedence there and they know.
And from an organization perspective, that's a great point, Cynthia. Then you're covered and you're recognizing the sensitivities around this because nobody does know exactly.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions from anyone about anything that we've touched on, anything that we haven't? Eric?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Biebernitz. I'm the Director of External Relations at Action Against Hunger. I have a question, and I'm happy to talk more about what Matt mentioned earlier, too, if that's of interest. But my question is, I'm sort of interested in if other organizations or you're seeing sort of an interest in decoupling future events from fundraising priorities. Because what I sort of valued a lot about what happened in 2020 is that we were able to really, the events that we did do in a virtual space were entirely kind of stewardship and engagement, and they weren't tied to goals per se. Is that something you see as a trend carrying forth, or do you think we're going to go back to what we were doing before, which is, you know, the plated meals and
right.
what have you?
I mean, I think there's a subset that's still going to want that very much. I do. I think from a human perspective, people want to go out and have a fun night. But I do think that trend was already happening before the pandemic, to be totally honest. We had already been in conversation with several of our clients about what their event looks like and what it means to be an event. Does it necessarily have to be a, plated black tie, not black tie, 400-person event? Is it something different? And I think that is part of where virtual has come in really helpful, because it allows you to hit a broader audience and to change it up. It can be, or to use your example, it could be a conversation one-on-one, right, with somebody from your team and, somebody on the ground for Action Against Hunger. It can be a larger thought-based process, and it can be geared just towards different groups. I mean, as Matt said, we're doing a lot of things with people where they're doing, whether it's the same fireside 4 times or they're doing a series of different ones throughout, or they're offering a master class for their high donors, with various specialists. And I think I do think you're right that you're going to start to see that, both in person and virtually moving forward.
That's good to know. Thank you.
I think, what you're touching on is something that we always sort of work with here from our team. Event is so many things, right? Event is a vehicle around which you utilize a moment to fundraise. So I think as long as you have a moment, it's determining what that moment is and whether it's in person or whether it's virtual, but it's a call to action point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Other questions? All right. Great. Well, we so appreciate the questions that you asked of us, and certainly if there are others that come to mind, we would encourage you to reach out. Cynthia, I know will be sharing information in the chat for a gift that Nicole and Cynthia at Garwood Events would like to share. If you want to talk a bit more about that, even as it pertains, yeah.
So first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to to come here. It's an interesting, and I know confusing thought process. I know there's a lot of material that we've talked about and ideas that are, that have been thrown out there. To be totally frank with all of you, this is the stuff that Cynthia and I love. We really like sort of the dissection and breaking it down and figuring out what works, and there is no roadmap of one right thing. And so this has brought out a great thing for us because it's brought out a lot of creativity. But to add to the point in what Sam was talking about of the fund that we were sort of talking about, we do have a little gift that we send to all of our clients, and that we'd love to be able to send one to everybody who attended here today. And so Cynthia will put our emails up in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to us directly and provide us with whatever the best mailing address is, and we'll send that on to you as well. And I just want to thank you all. Thank you and Matt and the whole team at Global Impact for inviting us here today. As I said, this is something we like to chat about. So.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Cynthia. I really enjoyed the conversation. We had, the opportunity to have this conversation a few weeks back, and said we have to do this as a webinar because it's just so interesting and could keep going for hours on the topic. And glad that you all could join us, and hopefully there were some helpful insights. And please feel free to reach out to either Global Impact or Garwood or both to talk about event planning, fundraising, strategy planning, and everything in between.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.